Okay, chemistry is a study of matter. In the beginning of your textbook, you talk about how matter is classified. Matter is classified into mixture and substance. And mixture is further divided into homogeneous mixture and heterogeneous mixture. A typical example of homogeneous mixture is water, salt water. In salt water, salt and water is simply mixed. Typical example of hetero mixture is granite. In granite, various minerals are mixed together. Similarly, substance is also divided into compound and element. A typical example of compound is water. When you decompose water, it generates oxygen and hydrogen. An element is just pure substance which are composed of one element. So typical example of element is oxygen, granite or diamond or iron. But actually classification itself is not so important. What is important is that in early chemistry could not distinguish between compound and mixture. For example, both of them, mixture and compound, are separated or decomposed into two or more substances. For example, water is separated into salt and water. Similarly, water molecule decomposed into oxygen and hydrogen. So in this respect, early chemists could not distinguish between compound and mixture. So because this caused a big problem regarding the validity of law of definite proportions. As you know, the law of definite proportions only applies to compound, not mixture. But the scientists who could not distinguish between compound and mixture argue that law of definite proportion does not hold. So this caused a big problem. Actually, there was a big debate over the validity of law of definite proportions. I'll talk about it later. And ancient Greek philosophers, Aristotle, say the universe are composed of two domains. Earth and heaven. This is earth, this is heaven. And there's a boundary between earth and heaven. Moon is on the boundary. And he argued that the earth are composed of four elements, which is called fourth element theory. Which includes air, water, fire, and earth. This is soil. So he argued that the materials in the earth are composed of air, water, fire, and earth. In contrast, heaven is filled with ether, which are called fifth element. And he also argued that the physics that govern Earth is different from the physics govern heaven. This is Aristotle's argument. In contrast, Democritus argued that universe are composed of atom, which is not broken down further, and there's a space between atom, which is called vacuum. So atom is here, atom is here. There's a empty space. There's nothing there. But in contrast, Aristotle says that there is no such thing as a vacuum. Every space is filled by element or matter. So Aristotle says that vacuum does not exist. In contrast, Democritus says that there is a vacuum. So this is also different from Aristotle and Democritus. As you know, from the standpoint of modern science, Democritus is right about atom. But regarding the vacuum, Aristotle is right. According to quantum mechanics, there is no such a thing as a vacuum. According to uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, there's a quantum fluctuation in vacuum. So there's no such a thing as a vacuum. So Aristotle is right about vacuum. I'm going to talk about quantum fluctuation later. Anyway, but Aristotle and Democritus is a philosopher, not scientist. So they claim their argument without experimental evidence. But 2,000 years later, Dalton appears. As you know, he's a scientist. He put forward atomic theory once again in 1803. But Dalton is a scientist, so he based his claims on scientific evidence. There's three scientific evidence when Dalton put forward atomic theory. First one is law of conservation of mass. Second one is, as I previously mentioned, law of definite proportion. The other one is law of multiple proportions. This is the three scientific evidence Dalton used to argue for atomic theory. To be more specific, these two laws, law of conservation of mass and law of definite proportions, were widely accepted and established when Dalton put forward atomic theory, whereas the law of multiple proportion was not known when Dalton put forward his atomic theory. Actually, Dalton created the law of multiple proportions. He argued that if atomic theory holds true, law of multiple proportion must also hold. Anyway, these three rules are nowadays very easily and naturally accepted law, but in the past, this law was not natural. People in the past don't think this law is applied. Why? First, take a look example of law of mass proportion, mass of conservation of mass. According to everyday experience, mass does change when reaction occurs. For example, wood burns into ash. This is a combustion reaction. It's a type of chemical reaction. When wood burns, it becomes ash, which is definitely lighter than wood. When metal rusts, and it becomes metal ash. which gets heavier than metal. So according to everyday experience, mass does change. And when reaction occurs, color also changes. Color often changes. So just as color changes, why shouldn't mass change? This is a common notion that mass does not conserve. But it was Lavoisier who established the law of mass conservation. He developed precise balance to measure mass before and after reaction. And especially he measured the mass of gas and conclude that mass of reactant and product is conserved. The combustion reaction is actually a first chemical reaction studied by humankind. Before Lavoisier, there was a prevailing theory that explained combustion reaction. This theory is called phlogiston theory. This is the prevailing theory to explain combustion reaction before Lavoisier. This theory is different from our notion that what is combustion reaction. According to our knowledge, in combustion reaction, oxygen is attached to the molecule. In contrast, in phlogiston theory, there's a substance, a hypothetical substance called phlogiston is inside the substance, and when it burns, phlogiston come out of the substance. It is released. This is the theory of phlogiston theory. It is contrast to our notion that when combustion reaction, oxygen is attached to it. But in the past, according to phlogiston theory, the hypothetical material called phlogiston come out of the material. So it is different, very different. But it was Lavoisier. This theory was wrong and established the law of mass conservation. So anyway, law of conservation of mass was established by Lavoisier. And regarding the law of multiple definite proportions, I said before, there was a big debate over the law of definite proportions because scientists in the past couldn't distinguish between mixture and compound. Some scientists does not think law of definite proportion holds true. So there was a big debate among prominent scientists, Proust and Berthollet. Two prominent scientists fight for 8 years over the validity of law of definite proportions. Proust argued that law of definite proportion holds, whereas Berthollet it does not. As we know, Proust is right. Law of definite proportion holds. Then why Berthollet argued that law of proportion does not hold? Because he experimented with iron oxide. When iron oxide decomposes, it produces iron and oxygen. And when he measured the mass of iron and mass of oxygen, the ratio was keep changing. It's different every time. So Berthollet don't agree with the law of definite proportions. But it turns out that the iron oxide actually was a mixture. The iron oxide with which Berthollet experiment was not single compound. It was a mixture of F2O and F2O3. So as I said before, law of definite proportion only applies to compound, but he experimented with mixture. So he did the experiment was wrong. So Proust point out this fact. So Proust was winning the battle rate. But you have to remember is that law of definite proportions only applies to gas, not solid. In some solid, law of definite proportion does not apply. For example, the molecular formula of iron oxide looks like this, but actual formula for iron oxide is not this one. This is one. This value, not 1. It varies from 0.85 to 0.95. It actually varies because it is solid. As you know, in solid, atom is regularly spaced. For example, iron oxide. As you see, atom is regularly spaced. In solid, sometimes some iron atom is missing. So this value is not exactly 1. It varies from 0.85 to 0.95. It varies. So in solid, actually, this ratio is not fixed. So this kind of solid is called solid solution. So you must remember that law of definite proportions only perfectly applies to gas, not in solid. In some solid, it does not apply. So Berthollet was not completely wrong. So in some respect, Berthollet was right. So to commemorate Berthollet, this kind of solid is called Berthollite. Anyway, initially, this law was not easily accepted when first suggested. There was ups and downs, but after some time, these two laws was widely accepted and established. When Dalton put forward atomic theory, this theory was accepted easily. And now move on to law of multiple proportions. Law of multiple proportions applies when two elements forms two or more substances. For example, carbon and oxygen combine to form carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Two elements forms two or more substances. Then we can apply law of multiple proportions. Now I take an example. Okay. Now carbon and oxygen form two compounds. Let's say A compound and B compound. So when A decompose, it produces carbon and oxygen. Similarly, when B decompose, it produces carbon and oxygen. But the mass ratio is different. For A compound, 1 gram of oxygen combined with 1.33 gram of carbon. Whereas for B compound, 1 gram of oxygen combined with 2.67 gram of carbon. So now take a look at this column. So when you look at this table, for this is the mass of carbon that combined with 1 gram of oxygen, but this value can be expressed as a simple integer ratio. It is 1 to 2. So this mass can be represented as a simple integer ratio, 1 and 2. This law is called law of multiple proportions. Now I'm going to modify this table a little bit. I'm going to multiply it by 12. When I multiply 12, this one is 12 gram. 12 gram. When I multiply this value by 12, it becomes 16 grams. And this one is 32 grams. So this table is equivalent to this one. I'm going to explain multiple proportions using this table. This table says that for 12 gram oxygen only combines 16 gram or 32 gram, which means that the mass of carbon is multiple of 16. 16, 32, or 48 grams possible. But 15 or 17 is impossible, right? According to this table, the mass of carbon that combined with 12 gram oxygen is only integer multiple of 16. This is the basic unit. It means that the atomic mass of carbon is 16. It's highly likely that carbon moves only a unit, 16 gram. So it is highly likely that atomic mass of carbon is 16 gram. This law strongly supports the atomic theory. So this is developed by Dalton. Now, then law of multiple proportion not only applies to carbon and oxygen, it also applies to nitrogen and oxygen. Nitrogen and oxygen combine to each other to produce three kinds of molecules. So, according to experimental data, given the fixed amount of oxygen, the mass of nitrogen is this. I don't know the exact mass of oxygen. Anyway, given the mass of oxygen, the mass of nitrogen that combined with the fixed amount of oxygen is this one. Is this data also support law of multiple proportion? Of course, right. This data can be expressed as a simple integer ratio. It is 1 to 4. So this data also can be expressed as a simple integer ratio. So this data also supports law of multiple proportions. The next step is that can you determine the molecular formula of ABC using this experimental data? Right. We can suggest the candidate chemical formula for this compound using this experimental data. For example, I will suggest the candidate for A, N2O, NO, yes, N2. This is the candidate formula for this experimental data. Why? This is equivalent to N2O2. This is equivalent to N4O2. So, given the O2, the number of nitrogen atoms that attached to O2 is 1 to 4. So, this chemical formula supports the experimental data. So, this formula can be a candidate for the chemical formula for A, B, C. The problem is that this formula is unique. Is this the only one that supports the this experimental data? It is not. I can suggest another chemical formula that supports this experiment. For example, so this chemical formula also supports the experimental data. This one is equivalent to N4O4. So number of nitrogen atoms that combine with O4 is 1 to 4. So this chemical formula also supports the experimental data. So problem is that we cannot determine molecular formula because there are numerous examples that support the experimental data. So this causes a big problem. So experimental data alone cannot determine the molecular formula. So chemists began to use assumption. To estimate molecular formula because experimental data alone cannot find molecular formula. They are going to use assumption to determine molecular formula. For example, Dalton used assumption called the principle of greatest simplicity. For example, hydrogen combined with oxygen produce water. I'm gonna estimate the molecular formula of water. According to the principle of greatest simplicity, how many atoms combine with oxygen and hydrogen? What's the ratio of oxygen and hydrogen to form water? According to this principle, nature does not like complexity. Nature likes simplicity. So the simplicity ratio is 1 to 1. This is a very simple ratio. So Dalton assumed that one hydrogen combined with only one oxygen to produce water. We don't know why. This is just assumption. So chemical formula for oxygen is H. And chemical formula for oxygen is O. So the molecular formula of water is OH. So this is the formula suggested by Dalton, which is wrong, as we know. The molecular formula of water is not OH, it is H2O. So Dalton suggested wrong molecular formula. The problem arose again. According to experimental data, 4 grams of hydrogen reacts with 32 grams of oxygen to produce 36 grams of water. So I'm gonna divide this data by 4. So 1, 8, 9. So if we assign atomic mass of hydrogen 1, the atomic mass of oxygen becomes 8. Right? According to experimental data, oxygen molecular weight, atomic weight is 8, not 16. So when you get wrong molecular formula, you also get wrong atomic weight. This is connected. When you get wrong molecular formula, it leads to wrong atomic weight. So this is a big problem. Now, this is the assumption used by Dalton. But another scientist use different assumption. Then another scientist get different molecular formula and different atomic weight. So there's a huge confusion arose. Now around this time, the new experimental findings are suggested by Gay-Lussac. Gay-Lussac find the experimental findings called the law of combining volume of gas, which says that it's water, hydrogen, oxygen. According to Gay-Lussac, the volume ratio is also integer. For example, 2 liters of hydrogen only reacts with 1 liter of oxygen. This is integer. Integer is important, and it produces 2 liters of water. This is the Gay-Lussac's finding. The volume ratio is also integer. This is important. But this law, this finding, contradicts Dalton's atomic theory. Why? Now, 2 liters of volume, I will express this 2 liters as 2 boxes. This is 2 liters. 1 box means 1 liter of oxygen and 2 liters of water. And according to Dalton, the molecular formula of hydrogen is HOOH. So I will represent hydrogen atom with empty circle. Empty circle means hydrogen atom. And closed circle means oxygen. So to produce 2 liters of water, this oxygen atom must be broken to produce 2 liters of water. So it looks like this. atom must be broken to produce 2 liters of gas. If we assume that in equal volume of gas contains equal volume of particles, it contradicts the Dalton's atomic theory. So this is a big problem. Around this time, Avogadro appears. And he suggests that this formula is wrong. According to Avogadro, the molecular formula of hydrogen is not H, it is H2. And this is O2. So we need 2 liters, so 2 hydrogen molecules react with 1 molecule to produce 2 liters of water molecule. This formula suggested by Avogadro. So in this case, the drawing changes like this. Now, molecular formula of H2 is, hydrogen is H2. 2 circles combined, and the molecular formula of oxygen is O2, not O. So in this case, oxygen atom need not be broken because so this is a picture of Avogadro, right? If we accept Avogadro's hypothesis, it can explain Gay-Lussac's law, and Dalton's atomic theory cannot be broken down. So everybody happy. So this is the suggested by Avogadro. You might think that Dalton welcomed Avogadro's hypothesis. Actually, it is not. Dalton rejected Avogadro's hypothesis. Why? Avogadro suggests this theory 1811. Around this time, the chemical battery was found. Chemical batteries found around 1800. Using chemical battery, chemists usually conduct electrolysis experiment. Electrolysis. Electrolysis experiment was very popular around 1800. When voltage is applied, new elements are found at the positive electrode, and new element also dissociated to and evolved in minus voltage. So this experiment was very popular around 1800. To explain this experiment, chemists developed a theory called affinity theory. Chemistry developed affinity theory to explain electrolysis experiment. According to this theory, there are 2 kinds of elements which have positive characteristic and negative characteristic. Element is classified into positive characteristic element and negative characteristic element, and chemical bond forms between opposite characteristic element. These 2 elements attract each other, electrostatic attraction. This is a chemical bond. This is a explanation of affinity theory. So when this molecule is in the electrolytic solution, when voltage is applied, it dissociates. So positive characteristic element moves to negative electrode, and negative characteristic element moves to positive electrode. So new element is found. This is the explanation by affinity theory. So in this theory, only opposite characteristic element combine to attract each other. According to this respect, this homonucleodiode molecule is impossible. Why? For H2, same element combine to make hydrogen atom. Even if we don't know the characteristic of H, we don't know whether it is positive or negative. Anyway, these 2 elements have the same characteristic. So these 2 elements repel each other. not attract each other, right? So this kind of molecule is impossible according to affinity theory. So scientists asked Avogadro how this kind of homonuclear diatomic is possible, but Avogadro cannot explain why. So Avogadro's hypothesis was rejected almost 50 years. Nowadays, we can explain this kind of molecule using covalent bond. We know covalent bond, but to explain covalent bond, we must know two concepts. First, electron is inside the atom. This is the first. And second, the electron behave quantum mechanically to form pairs. So only with quantum mechanics is developed, we can explain why, how H2 molecule is possible. But when is quantum mechanics developed? It is 1930s. Only 1930s we can explain how H2 is possible. But Avogadro is 1811, right? Avogadro is 1811. So this year, Avogadro cannot explain how this kind of molecule is possible, cannot explain. So this idea was rejected. So many scientists use their own assumption rather than scientific evidence to determine molecular structure. And different scientists use different assumptions. So they get different molecular formula and different atomic weight is suggested. So there was a big confusion around 80 years. And 50 years passed, and now 1861. So during this period, there was a big confusion. In 1861, scientists called Cannizzaro organized international conference to determine molecular structure. He revived Avogadro's work. He suggests this kind of idea, and when he accepts Avogadro's hypothesis, they can safely, systematically determine molecular structure. So I'm going to talk about the Cannizzaro's work. I'm going to explain how Cannizzaro persuaded chemists to accept Avogadro's hypothesis. First, Cannizzaro argued that simply accept Avogadro's hypothesis. For example, this is water. And when we accept Avogadro's hypothesis, the molecular formula of hydrogen is H2, and oxygen is O2, and H2. We don't know why H2 is possible, just accept the molecular formula. So, molecular formula of hydrogen is H2, and molecular formula of oxygen is O2. Just accept it, right? Now, the molecular formula is known. The molecular weight is determined. So the molecular weight of hydrogen is 2. And molecular weight of oxygen is 32. How do this data come from? From experimental data. Because when 36 gram of H2O is decomposed, it produces 4 gram and 32 gram. Using this data, you can determine the molecular weight of O2. Now, if the same volume of gas contains same number of particles, we can say that molecular weight is proportional to density, because same volume of gas contains same number of particles. It means that density is proportional to molecular weight. Now, there must be proportionality constant between two. So M equal mathematically expressed, right? This one. Now, next step is that how to determine K. Now, you can measure density of H2 and O2. This is experimental data. When you measure the density of H2 in the upper side of table, it is 94. When you measure the density of oxygen, it is so using this data, we can determine K for hydrogen. So for hydrogen, M equal 2, D equal 0.0894. So we can calculate K. The K is 22.37. Similarly, we can also determine K from O2 data. When you calculate K, it is 24. Happily, it is similar value, right? So if we take average value, it is equal to 22.4. This is the K, right? Now we determine K, then it means that now we know K. It means that if we measure the density of gas, we can calculate molecular mass, right? Because K is known. So if we measure K, it means that we can determine the molecular weight of gas, right? So now take a look at the table of below. So Cannizzaro experiment with 6 molecules. 1, 2, 6 molecules. And he measured density. So the density for first molecule is 0.714. Density of second molecule is etc. Right? This is the first experiment. And second experiment, they conduct an elemental analysis. He decomposed this molecule. When he decomposed first molecule, it produced carbon and oxygen, and measure the mass ratio of carbon and hydrogen according to experimental results. For first compound, the percentage of carbon is approximately 75%. For hydrogen, 25%. Similarly, for second molecule, when you measure the mass ratio, the carbon constitute 24% and approximately 6%, etc. This is the experimental data. Cannizzaro persuaded chemist with these two data, he can determine the molecular formula. Now I explain how. Now first step, given D, now we can determine molecular weight M. Why? As I said before, M equal K times D. K is known, right? So if we determine D, we can calculate molecular mass. So for this molecule, the molecular weight is 16. And for this molecule, molecular weight is 30. Now next step is that the mass ratio of carbon is 75%. So out of 16, how much carbon account for the mass of carbon? 4. So 16 times 0.75 is equal to 12. It means that 12 out of 6 are accounted by carbon. Similarly, 16 times 0.5 is equal to 4. 4 out of 16 is accounted for by hydrogen. So 16 is a sum of 12 and 4. Similarly, we can analyze the second molecule. It is approximately 24. 6, right? So now I give you time. Fill the blank, right? I give you time. Now fill the blank here. 네.
방위를
77.78이 나온다고? 71.8이 나와야 될 것 같은데? 아닌가?
요거 채운 거긴 한데
아, 77.8? 됐어.
or 37, if I remember correctly, and the average was 35, 35. I look up periodic table and that is about 35, 35.
다 해봤어요?
I like the one to say that it's pretty successful.
Okay, I'll give you a result. This one is maybe this data. Now take a look at this column. This value 12, 24, 72, etc. is the integer multiple of something. What is the integer? It's 12. This value is the integer multiple of multiple. So this is the basic unit. It means that it is highly likely that atomic mass of carbon is 12. Similarly, take a look at this column. This is the integer multiple of 35.4. It means that it is highly likely that the atomic mass of chlorine must be 35.4. Similarly, this one is 1. So this is the atomic mass, right? So from this atomic mass, we can determine the molecular formula of this one. For this molecule, there is one carbon atom, and the atomic mass is 1. The mass of hydrogen comprises of 4. So this formula is CH4. For this molecule, we have 2 carbon atom, C2, and we have 6 hydrogen atom because atomic mass of hydrogen is 1. For this one, C6, H6. For this one, CH3. This corresponds to 3 atoms of chlorine. For this one, C2, H5, Ca. Finally, CCl4. So in this way, Cannizzaro can determine the molecular formula systematically only with these two data. In this way, Cannizzaro persuaded chemists to accept Avogadro's hypothesis. But importantly, Cannizzaro cannot explain why this formula is possible. It is only explained only in 1930s when quantum mechanics is developed. Now, move on to another topic. As I said before, 1800 chemical battery was developed, and chemists usually use battery to experiment electrolysis. Chemists use a battery to conduct electrolysis experiment. Then, at that time, what physicists do? Physicists do experiment using vacuum tube. This is their experimental apparatus. This is electrolytic solution. This is a vacuum tube. This is electrode. This is a battery. They apply voltage in the vacuum tube. There's a gas molecule inside the vacuum tube. As you know, gas molecule or air is insulator. It poorly conducts electrons, so it cannot, even if you can apply high voltage, electricity does not flow because air is insulated. But when the gas pressure is lower, so when the molecule escape out of the tube, when gas pressure is lower, electricity flows. Discharge occurs, even if the voltage is not high enough. So this is the experiment carried out by physicists. So to conduct this kind of experiment, we need two technology. First, vacuum pump. To evacuate vacuum tube. Second one is, even the smallest crack spoil the vacuum, so we need glass working. Only with these two techniques, we can conduct this kind of experiment. This technique is very, very important actually. Anyway, with this technique, physicists conduct this kind of experiment. the vacuum tube, we apply voltage, then electricity flows and discharge occurs, and then the entire tube emit light. The vacuum tube gets bright. This phenomenon is called glow discharge. Entire tube emits light. We can explain why tube is bright because, as I talk later, when voltage is applied, electron is emitted from the cathode, and the electrons are accelerated, and the electrons collide the molecule in the vacuum tube, and the molecule are excited to excited state by the collision with electrons, and the molecule relax back to the ground state, emitting light. This light is a source of glow discharge. So the color of light or wavelength of light depends on the spacing. Some molecule has large spacing, some molecule has a small spacing. So the color of light depends on the gas molecule. So it depends on the type of molecule inside the gas tube. This is a glow discharge. And physicists begin to evacuate the vacuum tube further. So the molecule decrease. When you evacuate the vacuum tube further, then the vacuum tube gets dark. The vacuum tube no longer emits light. Why? Because the glow discharge comes from the molecule inside the tube, but you evacuate further, the gas molecule disappears. So vacuum tube gets dark. But scientists find faint line is observed. It is very faint, not bright. Faint line, straight line comes from cathode to anode. This line is called cathode ray. Because it comes from the cathode. So scientists begin to investigate the nature of this cathode ray. What's the nature or what's the identity of this cathode ray? There's two arguments about the nature of cathode ray. Some scientists say that the cathode ray is particle. Another scientist argue that cathode ray is a wave. Usually, scientists in Germany argue that the cathode ray is wave, whereas scientists in England argue that the cathode ray is a particle. Then how do you determine the cathode ray is whether particle or wave? They apply magnetic field and electric field. When the magnetic field and electric field is applied, when the cathode ray deflect, it means that the cathode ray means particle. But when we apply, even if we apply magnetic or electric field, if the trajectory of cathode ray does not change, it means that cathode ray is wave. But when England scientists applied magnetic field and electric field, it is deflected. So they determined that cathode ray is particle. So as we know, this particle is called electron. Then why German scientists determined that cathode ray is wave? Because as I said before, to conduct this kind of experiment, we need two technology: vacuum pump and glass working. But this technique in Germany is not good. So they cannot maintain vacuum. So their experiment was not good enough to observe the deflection of this ray. So anyway, the cathode ray is known to be particle by England chemist, England physicist. So we now know that this cathode ray is particle. Particle has mass. The mass of this particle is called m, and when electric field is applied, the trajectory is deflected. It means that this particle has also charge. So the charge is called E. So physicists investigate the charge to mass ratio. The scientist who determined the charge to mass ratio is Thomson. Thomson developed a method to determine the charge to mass ratio of this particle, which is electron. So, in your textbook, they introduced how the charge to mass ratio is determined is introduced in your textbook. So, I'm also talk about the method. But what truly matters is not how he measured this charge to mass ratio. The most important thing is that Thomson conducted this experiment repeatedly. Now, for example, in first they used iode electrode and they measured the charge to mass ratio, and then Thomson replaced this one by copper, and then measured this ratio again, and they used another metal, nickel, and then measured this ratio again. But the result is all the same. This ratio is universal. It does not change. It does not depend on the type of electrode they used. This ratio does not depend on the gas molecule in the vacuum tube. This value is universal. It's all the same. It is very strong, important implication. It means that the electrons which constitute cathode ray is fundamental unit that exists in every metal. According to the experimental fact, this ratio does not change. It is universal. It means that the particle in the cathode ray is fundamental particle that is inside every metal. This is the important result, right? Anyway, I'm going to talk about how to measure charge to mass ratio. So this is the Thomson's experimental setup. Now electron with the initial velocity of V0 moves in the y direction, and this is y direction. In y direction, I'm installed plate which apply electric field. So charge and minus charge is impressed. So these two plate applied electric field on the electron. So electron moves in the y direction, and when electrons enter the plate, it feels force due to electric field. It is deflected upward. So this is a trajectory by electrons. Now, initially the electron has velocity only with x direction, right? But when you enter the plate, it feels force due to y direction. So it has y direction also has, right? Now, the velocity of x does not change. Velocity of y change because of this force. Now, this is the force felt by electron in the y direction. F equal ma. This is the mass of electron. This is the acceleration in the y direction due to this electrostatic force. And this force comes from the electrostatic force. It is equal to E times rho g. E is the charge on electron. Rho g is the strength of electric field by this plate. So AY can be expressed using this. And second, the length of this plate is L. The velocity of electron is V0. And the time T is the time that it takes that it passes through this plate. Time T is the time it takes get through this plate. So this V0 L T is related. V0 is equal to L over T. So from this equation, T is equal to L over V0. So T equal L over V0, AY equal E over L. Now, as I said before, the electron is deflected, so we can measure diffraction angle theta. Diffraction angle is equal to Vy over Vx. And as I said before, the Vx, which is the velocity component of x, does not change. It is constant because in x direction no force is exerted. So this is constant. So this is equal to V0. And velocity of y is accelerated. It is equal to acceleration times t. Now ay is substituted by this one. This one is go to this one. T is substituted by this one. So when you substitute ay t here, you can obtain this. This is the result. Now we are going to determine charge to rest ratio. We are going to determine charge to rest ratio using this equation. Now, to determine E over m, we need to know theta. Theta is the diffraction angle. We can measure the diffraction angle. We can measure. And L is the length of plate. We can control the length of plate. We can control. E is the electric field, strength of electric field. We can also control electric field strength. So, from this equation, we can determine E over m only with V0. If we know the V0, using this equation, we can determine E over m because we can measure theta. This one is controllable. So, only if we know V0, we can determine E over m using this equation. But V0, which is the initial velocity of electron, cannot be controlled. So we need to measure V0. So we need second experiment to measure V0. In second experiment, we are going to apply magnetic field. This is electric field. In second experiment, you are going to apply additional magnetic field. Now the direction of magnetic field is in this direction, perpendicular to the plane, G direction. You are going to apply magnetic field in this direction, which is perpendicular to electric field. So I am going to display magnetic field using cross-hatched circle. This is the direction of magnetic field. So now electrons feels electric field and magnetic field. And electrons feel force due to electric field in the plus y direction. And according to Lorentz force law, the electron moves in the x direction, magnetic field in the g direction. According to Lorentz force law, the electron feels force due to in the minus y direction. Understand? So electron feels plus y direction due to electric field, and electron also feels magnetic field, and the direction is minus y. So when you increase magnetic field, the trajectory of electron gets down because of this minus y direction. When you increase further, the trajectory of electron gets lower. So in some certain strengths of magnetic field, electrons go straight. in this situation, the force due to magnetic electric field is exactly balanced by magnetic field. Force due to magnetic field. In this case, the electrons go straight. Scientists measure the magnetic field strength when electrons go through. Okay. So I'm going to express this situation by mathematical expression. Our goal is, what is our goal? We are going to determine V0. Okay. So the force is equal to the sum of two terms. First one is force due to electric field, which is equal to E times E. And electron also feels force due to magnetic field. Lorentz force law, according to physics textbook, is equal to V term is included for magnetic force. And when these forces are exactly balanced, it is equal to 0. How do you know that this is 0? Electron go straight. When electron go straight, this equation satisfied. So E is cancelled. Right? So when we only consider the absolute magnitude of this equation, this is equal to this one. When you only compare the magnitude of this one. So this is our finding. We are going to determine V of the electron. It is equal to E over B, right? So instead of V0, we're going to E over E. Okay. Is it clear? So in this way, using this equation, we can determine charge to mass ratio. Theta is measured. Magnetic field and electric field is also measured. L and E is controlled. So using this equation, we can obtain charge to mass ratio. As I said before, this is not actually important. How the charge to mass ratio is determined is not important. What truly matters is that when Thomson measured M over E, he repeated the experiment. He repeatedly replaced this one by another metal. Even if we replace this electrode by another metal, the value does not change. This is important, right? It means that the electrons that comes out the electrode is fundamental unit that constitutes every substance. This is important. Okay. Anyway, in this way, Thomson measured charge to mass ratio. Then, what's the next step? The next step is we are going to determine E independently. The E is determined by oil drop experiment carried out by Millikan. I'm going to explain how electrical charge is determined. So experimental setup looks like this. There's plate and oil droplet pass through the hole. This is droplet, and we are going to apply again voltage. And I must emphasize that this experiment is not carried out in vacuum. It is carried out in atmospheric pressure, under atmosphere. So it means that there's a gas molecule inside the experimental cell. And now I'm going to irradiate X-ray. X-ray is emitted, but the target is not oil. The target of X-ray is air molecule. Okay, this is oil droplet, but the X-ray does not target oil. The X-ray target the air molecule. When the air molecule hit by X-ray, it loses electrons. Then electron is emitted from the air molecule, and then electron is attached to the gas droplet. So oil drop is negatively charged. Now, this oil droplet feels force due to gravity, which is equal to mg. Now, m represents the mass of oil, not electron. Okay, this is the gravity acceleration. Now, oil droplet is negatively charged. As I said before, I'm going to apply voltage. So this oil droplet feels force due to electric force. Now the electric force is Q dot E. So this droplet force, downward force due to gravity, is equal to m times g, and additionally this oil droplet force, upward force due to electric field, which is equal to Q times E. Q is the charge on the oil droplet. So, and we are going to start microscope. And observe that the oil droplet is floating. It is at rest. When the oil droplet at rest, these two forces are balanced. We are going to use a microscope whether this oil droplet is at rest. So equation looks like this. Now we are going to determine charge on the oil droplet. So Q equal. So to determine the charge on the oil droplet, we need three values: E, G, M. This is the gravity constant, which is constant, right? Is the electrical strength of electrical field. We can control E. So to determine Q, we need to know the mass of oil droplet. So only if we know the mass of oil droplet, we can determine the charge on the oil droplet. So determine oil droplet, we need second experiment. What is second experiment? Now, in second experiment, you are going to turn off this voltage. You are going to turn off electric field. So this term disappears. Then what happens? This oil droplet begins to fall down, right? Now, if this experiment is carried out in vacuum, it accelerates continuously. But as I said before, this experiment is not carried out in vacuum. It is carried out on the atmosphere. It means that there's a gas molecule. So as the oil droplet falls down, it continuously collides with gas molecule, right? So its speed continuously decreases. It means that this droplet feels frictional force. More specifically, drag force. This oil droplet feels drag force or frictional force because it collides continuously with a gas molecule. So, and according to physics, the drag force or frictional force is opposite direction. And according to physics, the drag force is proportional to velocity of gas molecule, velocity of this oil droplet. So initially, the speed of droplet is 0, so frictional force is 0, and it begins to increase its speed. It is accelerated, so speed increase. Then frictional force is also increased. So at certain point, this gravity force is balanced by frictional force. It is balanced. Then at that point, from that point, this oil droplet does not accelerate. It falls down at constant speed. Right? The constant speed is called terminal speed. So we are going to measure the terminal speed using microscope. And if we measure the terminal speed, we can determine the m. How? Now, that's the most frictional force or drag force is proportional to V. So there must be proportionality constant between two. So drag force or frictional force is proportional to V. There must be proportionality constant. It is called frictional constant. This frictional constant is studied by Stokes. According to Stokes, F is equal to U pi eta R. R is the radius of drumlet. Oh, I'm sorry. Here again. To determine Q, we need to measure the mass of oil drumlet. Then how to measure M? We are going to assume that oil drop forms a perfect sphere. This is oil drumlet with radius R. This is oil drumlet. I'm going to measure the mass of this oil droplet with perfect sphere. Then M equal to volume times density. Then what is the volume of this oil droplet with radius R? It is 4/3 pi R cubic. And density is low. So again, to determine Q, we need to know the M. And M is expressed like this. Density of oil is known. So to determine M, we need to determine R. So if we know the R, we can determine the mass of oil droplet. If we know the mass of oil droplet, we can determine Q. So point is that we need to determine R, right? So here again, the frictional constant is expressed like this. What this formula means is that there are two oil droplets. According to Stokes' formula, which one has larger frictional force? This one, because frictional constant depends on R, which is the radius of oil droplet. According to Stokes, the larger droplet has large frictional force. It is easily explained because how frictional force comes from? It comes from the collision of gas molecule. This drag force or collision force comes from the collision with gas molecules. When the oil droplet gets larger, it frequently collides with more gas molecule. So definitely larger molecule experience more frictional force, right? This is the viscosity of air. So this is constant actually. So it does not matter. Important point is that frictional constant depends on R. So frictional force also depends on R. You are going to determine R. So measure the frictional force means that we can determine R. Okay. So anyway. Huh?
So maybe go back to the equation on the right.
Well,
So I was just asking if that's a 6 or a sigma on the left of pi.
this one?
On the left of pi, yeah.
Pi. Actually, I don't know how this equation comes from actually.
I mean, if that is a 6 or a sigma, just write down the minus of 6. Thank you.
I'm sorry. We'll talk about it later. Okay, this one. Now, as I said before, the droplet accelerate at the speed increase, the frictional increase. So at some point, the gravity force is balanced by frictional force. Then the speed of droplet constant. This speed is called terminal speed. We are going to determine terminal speed. So in this case, frictional force is exactly balanced by gravity force. So this one is this is the drag force, and this one is mg, and m is the mass of droplet is equal to this one. So this is the mass of all droplet. And when the drag force is exactly balanced by gravity force, the speed is terminal speed. So this is Vt. This is our master equation to determine R. From this equation, you are going to measure terminal speed. And rho is the density of drop, which is constant. G is also constant. So all of them are constant. Only R remains. So from this equation, we can determine radius of air drop, oil droplet. From R, we can determine mass of oil droplet. From R, we can finally determine charge on the oil droplet. This is the method Millikan employed to measure charge on the oil droplet. But the most important thing is as follows. This is oil droplet. So Millikan measure the charge on the oil droplet, this particle, 1, 2, and then he measured another oil droplet, 2, and he measured another droplet again, Q3. The result is all different, not same value. It is under your textbook, under exercise. According to exercise, some droplet, the charge on the cube is 10 to the minus 9. Important point is that when you measure the charge on the oil droplet, it's all different, right? Why? But this value, similarly, integer multiple of some value. This is not random. This value corresponds to the some integer value of multiple of integer value. The integer value is 10 minus. This value corresponds to the integer multiple of this value. Then why this result comes from? Because some oil droplet 1 electron are charged. Some droplet 2 electrons are charged. Some droplet 3 electrons are charged. So this one corresponds to integer multiple of this value. So this is the basic unit of the electric charge. In other words, electrical charge is also quantized, like atomic weight. Atomic weight, mass is also integer multiple of atomic weight. Similarly, charge is also integer multiple of this one. This is the basic electrical charge. So in this way, Millikan developed the method to measure electrical charge. Given electrical charge, we can also determine mass of electron, because according to Thomson, the charge to mass ratio is calculated. If we know the charge of electron, we can also determine M. This is this Millikan's research. Okay. Okay, next time we are going to study another topic. Up to now, we studied electrons in the vacuum tube. According to experiment by Thomson, electrons are emitted from cathode. It flows to cathode to anode. we studied this cathode ray, but sometimes later, scientists find that another flow found in the opposite direction. Electron flows from left to right, from cathode to anode, but there are another flow from anode to cathode. This flow is called corner ray. So scientists begin to investigate the nature of corner ray. When you identify the nature of cathode ray, we apply electric field and magnetic field. Similarly, to investigate the corner ray, they employ electric field and magnetic field. But there are three important differences occurs. First one, when you apply electric field, it is, for example, plus, minus, it deflected upward. It means that electron has negative charge. But when you apply electric field, it deflected downward. It's different, opposite direction. It means that the particles that constitute corner ray has positive charge, right? Second, when you apply electric field, it deflects much. Deflection angle is large, but it deflects also, but it deflects very slightly. Only slightly deflected. It deflected very largely. It means that the mass of corner ray is very large. Third one is very, very important. As I repeatedly stressed that the M over E is constant. It is universal. It does not depend on the type of electrode. It does not depend on the type of molecule inside the tube. It is universal. But when you measure the charge to mass ratio of Qm, it varies. It depends on the molecule. It depends on the type of molecule. M over Q change every time. So it is the three main difference. Actually, corner ray turn out to be the cation. If we assume that corner ray is cation, we can explain all of these facts. So this is the next topic. Okay. And I have something to tell you. Tomorrow I'm going to take a medical leave, so we don't have class tomorrow. Sorry. Okay. Do you have any question?